up, we have a panel called Born on the Web, The Rise of Gen Z. Welcome to the stage, moderator John Swartz from USA Today, Mark Adams, Senior VP of Innovation at Vice Media, Parminder Singh from Mediacorp, Shaul Olmert from Playbuzz, and Shannon Kalayanamitr from Orami.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? Good? Good show? Okay, before we start, I want to ask you two questions. How many of you are familiar with Generation Z? Raise hands. How many of you, wow. How many of you know a lot about Generation Z? Okay, good, good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a panel then. Let me introduce my panel here. Actually, what I'd like them to do is briefly introduce themselves. But one thing I also want to mention about Generation Z is it's very mystifying to me, that demographic, and even with a son I have who's 16, who is part of Generation Z, it's very unpredictable. They like to text, they don't like talking on the phone, they like buying things directly online and having it delivered to the home, but they don't want to pay for it, so I do. They are very security conscious, they don't like spending money, and they're not the loyalist of customers, so they're perfect for retailers, right? No. So anyway, let's start with
Hi, I'm Shaul Olmert, co-founder and CEO of Playbuzz. I'm a proud father of a couple of Generation Z, objects. And also in my business, I run a content platform that is catering to about 100 or 200 million Generation Z people every month.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Shannon Kalayanamitr. I run a e-commerce platform for women. And I'm actually Generation X. Most of my people that so I'm almost 40, right? I'm 40 next year. But my kids are, my friends are actually having kids, so I'm actually very familiar with Generation X, Millennials, and Z.
My name is Parminder Singh. I run a dual function of running the commercial and digital functions at Mediacorp. Joined Mediacorp about a month back. Prior to that, I was working for Twitter. My claim to fame for being here is I'm the father of a Generation Z parent, so I'm going to channelize my son's thoughts as you ask me these questions.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mark Adams. I'm actually a millennial, but I'm trying to do the Benjamin Button thing of getting older and also getting younger. So I'm trying to channel my inner Gen Z, and I'll be channeling it tonight at all the bars that I can find.
So we're kind of identifying ourselves as part of a generation. So those of you who may not be unfamiliar with the United States, there's kind of an obsession. We divide demographics by age, and then we stereotype or categorize each person within those groups. And there's always kind of a tilt towards the younger demographic because they tend to have a huge amount of influence on their parents and on their spending decisions. So just to make it easier and really quick, can someone just explain to me or define what a Generation Zer is? And is it something that's unique to just the United States, or is it unique throughout the world?
You market most.
So it always starts with the United States because that's the capital of marketing, and that's the biggest economy. That's where the money is. So that's why they busy packaging this audience in a way that advertisers can understand. So they give it a name, or usually just a letter. Z being the last, I guess. After we had Generation X, Y, and Z, I'm not sure exactly what the next generation will be called, but it starts as just sort of a marketing label, but then you realize that it actually kind of defines the zeitgeist and helps you understand how the people of today are different than the people of yesterday, which is us. Which is, by the way, really embarrassing to sit on stage and talk about young people. It kind of feels like how our grandparents looked like when they spoke about, those young kids that listen to rock and roll music. Yeah. So that's us now. The joke is on us.
Well, it's funny because I think Ernst & Young did a study on this demographic, and they found that 57% of them would rather save their money than spend it immediately. And what they spend it on, they tend to be very, very picky on what they buy. So does that make them almost impossible to sell to or to appeal to? or do you just appeal to their parents to get to them?
I mean, I do an online retailer, so I guess I could answer to that. We actually don't target Z. So just to break it down, we target mostly Xers. And Xers are people who are 35 years old right now to about almost 50. And just because, one, they have the most purchasing power, we can understand their marketing, what platforms they go to. They still like a lot of traditional, but they're on Facebook. So we target a lot of that. Then we go
so
to
the Generation X, those that are 35 and older,
Yep.
tend to use Facebook quite a bit
And Line.
Twitter, and the Generation Zers use Snapchat. They don't.
Correct.
They think Facebook's for really old people. So if you're over 35 or over, you're ancient to them. So that,
And even millennials, I mean, a lot of millennials get a lot of crap for like being entitled and all this other stuff and how they follow your passion, but it's also the way you target to them with the content you use and the platforms you use. But because it's so close to Generation X, like it's already so easy to understand like what they want to go for. So for us, we actually target X and millennial, and then Z, we have started to dabble in with them, but you're right, they're all on the Snapchats. They're 6 to 15 seconds on a video clip. And so it's not the 2 minutes anymore
Yeah.
that people are doing, and I guess you would have more experience in that, but that's our finding so far.
So I was going to ask, lead to Mark, because we talk about consumption of content. So I know there's an obsession in the newspaper industry. There's an obsession with reaching a younger audience, which is ironic because most of our audience is getting older and dying, so we're losing them, honestly. And for yours, it probably skews younger.
I mean, what was interesting was, off the record, kind of about 10 years ago, Vice was just a magazine that you picked up, like a hipster magazine you picked up in a like usually somewhere in east of a major city, you know. And then Spike Jonze, the Oscar-winning director, came to us and said, when you do all these amazing interviews and you do all this immersive journalism, you take a camera, right? And we were like, yeah. So we went out and bought all this camera equipment, like the stuff you see here, like really expensive stuff, and we had the right lenses, and basically bet the farm, the whole company, on trying to move into video. And that was really interesting because YouTube was saying, you know, keep it short, keep it funny, right? So if you wanted to make content for YouTube, it was really simple. You made it short and you made it funny. Now, if you're a brand, see if this resonates with you. So we were making, you know, I'll give you an example. We made a North Korea documentary 10 years ago, which now gets 1 million hits a month now because North Korea's back in the news, right? And trust me, it's going to be for a while. So we made this, it was 45 minutes long. It wasn't funny and it wasn't short. And so even YouTube said to us, this is completely not what we expect. And we said, perhaps the expectations that you have of your own demographic are wrong. Perhaps you basically, if you keep feeding the same stuff, then you never really see any other results, right?
That's a problem in content in general, is that we're all in pursuit of the same story in the same amount of time. It all comes out roughly at the same time. And the traffic spikes based on the headline immediately, and then it dies dramatically. So we're starting to find, I don't know if you feel the same way, but that if you do longer stories that are kind of more enterprising or contrarian or different, there's more of appeal. And I think maybe that might appeal to this younger demographic. I don't know, but that this whole idea that everything has to be shorter and shorter is not necessarily true.
Yeah, I think it just reduces to absurdity. And this is where advertisers are as well, right? So Havas Media did a study that said, they asked young people what the top 500 brands meant to them in the world, right? So this is the Fortune 500 biggest brands on the planet, right? Spending billions combined every year. And the result of 320,000 young people was that 74% of the top 500 brands could disappear this afternoon, and no one would even notice or care.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you? That tells you that all the reach and all the frequency and all the agencies and all the strategy and all the money and all the ad dollars is achieving amongst this demographic not a lot. Because we're whittling down the message to be so short and so punchy and so, because we expect them to have no appetite for a longer story.
It's almost superficial to the point where there's no sticking point to them.
Exactly.
And that must be hard in what you do, because in a sense you want to like in the U.S., Donald Trump proved that if you oversimplify things, people will buy it and they'll love it, especially among older people, which is kind of counter to what most of us would think.
But I think, look, I looked at, I don't want to cast blame here, but I just looked at USA Today's website. And USA Today's website looks the exact same way it looked 20 years ago, and the exact same way that the newspaper looked like 100 years ago or 500 years ago when print was invented. So we always talk about, young people being entitled or lazy or whatever it is, but, maybe you guys are lazy if you're not adapting your message to the fact that these people live in a whole different environment. My 13-year-old daughter has never read an article in her life, nor will she ever read an article. And I'd like to think that she has the same amount of curiosity and potential that, everybody else in this room has. And I think it's up to us to create content in a way that she can understand. And if all we're going to offer to her...
How do you do that? I mean, what do there's more, what do you need to do?
So I think that, what we see is that the offering on the internet today is either long-form articles that, as we said, are obsolete and people spend only a few seconds looking at them, so they don't really read them. Or we can see some animated GIFs on Snapchat, stuff that's just meant to be very, very shallow, to kind of attract you in, but doesn't really create any depth of experience. And, it's important that people will read, that people will engage, that people will spend time. So,
So, I'll make an admission, and it's true for most papers, it's definitely true for ours. There are probably, in tech, there are probably 7 companies that we cover that get 90% of the coverage. And you know who they are. And the others, a lot of startups that might become hugely relevant are ignored until it's too late, until somebody like a Vice or Recode or the information, somebody else champions them, and then we start chasing them. So you are right. I will definitely. It's a fear of losing people.
This is Singapore, so let me represent Singapore in this discussion.
Okay.
So this is an interesting challenge for us because Mediacorp is a public broadcaster with traditional strengths in television, radio, print, and then all of a sudden now you have Generation Z, which is 30% of Singapore. 30% of Singapore is Generation Z. So now you have a public broadcaster with huge strengths in TV, radio, print, and you have to now cater to a generation for which, and then let me tie this back to your first question, which is what's different between Generation Z and the rest of the generation. Now, if you look at it from a global perspective, any generation can be categorized through 3 lenses: socio-economic or technology. Now, the socio-economic factors vary from country to country. So yes, the generation got labeled, it started in the US, but each country has its own definition of Generation Z because the socio-economic factors change depending on which country you're in. But the technology factor is the constant globally for Generation Z. And the one constant for a Generation Z is that this is the first generation that does not know life without internet or without a smartphone.
Yeah.
See, technology is what happens in your lifetime. Technology is what is when you remember the life without that technology. This is the first generation for whom a smartphone is a piece of furniture. It's not technology.
But don't you think that as opposed to different generations, Shannon and I grew up more or less in the same time on both sides of the Atlantic. We had absolutely nothing in common.
Yeah.
We were not exposed to any media story or inspiration that were the same. Today, whether you grow up in Singapore or the United States or South America or wherever you are, you have the same device, the exact same device. You are exposed pretty much to the same content that is available to you. So maybe the differences between the generation, maybe the cultural differences are not as big as they used to be.
Which is exactly what I'm saying. So you could differ on socio-economic, cultural, political factors, but technology is a constant for all generations. So a 10-year-old in Singapore has more in common with a 10-year-old in Texas compared to a 60-year-old in Singapore. And that's the common factor between Generation Z. And so the way you would create content, so a lot of content creators went through 3 cycles. You started with TV, radio, print, and once internet came, you started reimagining your TV program, your magazines on the internet. Because your audience was wanting a newspaper experience on the internet. They wanted a print experience on the internet. So even Kindle, when you go to a Kindle, all you're doing is recreating your book reading experience on Kindle. Sure. But this generation does not have the offline context. They do not want a newspaper print experience on the internet. So you really have to reimagine the way you appeal to this generation by reimagining your content in a completely different way. So it's more swipe, less type, because they respond to your content totally different from their parents.
Actually, I think one of the reasons why this is a panel topic, right, is Gen Z an opportunity? Are we supposed to start paying attention to them? A lot of people don't know that there's a difference between millennials and Gen Z. Millennials are one
Yeah, can you explain the difference? Because it's, after a while, they all blend together.
Like to me, so I've done a lot of research, and also I target a lot of the millennials as well. And again, there's this YouTube video that's going around that everybody likes, Simon Sinek, and talking about the millennials and how
the workforce, yeah.
Yeah, and how like basically the reason why the millennials are very entitled is because they were like, we allow them to be entitled. We allow them, what do you want to do? You get a trophy for being the last place, et cetera, et cetera. Passion, here's what I wear, hipster, da da da, whatever. And so that's the slack that they're getting. But the other thing that they have is the way that they consume content, how they consume content. They use two screens, whereas the Gen Z uses 5 screens. Loyalty, in my study, in my research, loyalty for millennials is less, loyalty in Gen Z is more. So Gen Z, who are 20 and above right now, the ones that I know that my friends' children's, they actually have real jobs.
I think, but you're mentioning about loyalty, I think when we were talking about this earlier, Gen Z, maybe they're more loyal to certain types of brands, but they're not consistent in how they don't consistently buy from the same brand. I mean,
I would actually challenge their loyalty. I think that when you look at the different researchers, like the one you quoted, or the one that Google made about Gen Z, which made a lot of headlines, it was created by Google. Of course, Google is going to tell you that Gen Z has brand loyalty because they want brands to advertise with them and reach that audience. But this is a generation that grew up with full control. They were born with a remote control in their hand. They choose what content to consume. They buy a la carte. They nobody's making any choice for them. And since they are in control and they're cherry picking, they live in this kind of like on-demand world. There's no reason to be loyal to anything. If they're entertained by, they move from Snapchat to Musical.ly and back to Instagram or whatever it is because they can choose.
There's that whole phenomena, was it Pokemon Go? So that was the thing for about 3 days among my son and his friends.
6 weeks exactly
so
before it dropped 25%.
Exactly, and once the summer was over, it was pretty much over. It was an outdoor.
This is that type of, if you look, this is a brutal thing to say, but like, if you're totally daft, right, what you'll do is you take every new media format that comes. I mean, like, I was a DJ, right, in London years ago. I failed one. But I remember when Minidisc came out, and it was like the hot stuff. It was like, you've got to use Minidisc, right? And everyone got really excited about Minidisc. And then, if you look at the world of brand building right now, we're like children playing football. The ball goes over there, we all run over there. The ball goes over there, we all run over there. So it's like AR, VR, 360 video, and basically brands are just going, no strategy whatsoever, because they think they don't understand this generation, and they think that they can speak to this generation in formats, but they can't.
That's a very good point, because I remember last year going to a number of developer conferences. So I went to F8, Google I/O, Apple, and it was a throw technology at the wall strategy. Okay, AI, AR, VR, it's going to go somewhere. We're not sure when or where, but it's going to be there, and we're going to be to take advantage of that market. And you get the sense that they're just hoping something sticks, but they're not sure when.
No, that's also because the influencers that influence this generation are totally different from how we think of influencers. We started off with the age of having these big global celebrities, big movie stars, or big business tycoons who were influencers. And then the millennials had their YouTube stars, this big, again, very global. This is the age of micro-influencers. So each country has their own influencers with 25, 30,000 followers, and you don't even know about them. Most of the brands even know about them. So when we think of celebrities or icons, we go to the big names. But the truth is this, that your 14-year-old has his own set of micro-influencers. He has his own set of 20,000 people along with whom he's following this particular personality on Snapchat, on Twitter, on YouTube, or wherever, and he's being influenced by them. So it's important for brands to understand who are their influencers, who are micro-influencers. They influence a very specific segment, but they have a very deep and strong influence on that segment.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is that every generation gets more fragmented.
Yeah.
You know, like as time goes by, we're moving from a very centralized world into a world of personal choice, of personal preference, of calling your own shots and not be committed to any foundations, institutions, brands, broadcasters. So it's becoming much more of a control. We also have to, this is a generation that grew up in an environment where they express themselves with technology. And they're actually expected to constantly broadcast themselves to the world on not even on an hourly, more like on a minute-by-minute basis. And really their perception of who they are is how they are presented on social media, because that's when people see them. For us it was riding a fancy car or wearing a fancy clothes. Today nobody sees which car you drive, nobody sees which clothes you wear, because they don't really see you. They only see you on social media. So it's all about which filter you apply. And that kind of serves the definition for who you are.
Or the distinction between offline and online. We still think in terms of offline and online. And I'm very clearly conscious of when I'm going online versus when I'm offline. But for this generation, there is actually no difference. It's very seamless for them.
Somebody was saying this earlier, and this is something that was kind of a wake-up call for us, which for us are kind of dinosaurs in this era right now. And one of the things is basically the people who are 20 have never seen newspapers before, and they will never even read or touch a newspaper anymore. So one of the main thing, again, I'm from Thailand and Indonesia, right? So basically, a lot of people, not Singapore, a lot of people still don't understand that you need to be online. I mean, we don't even have that basic fundamental yet, like in Thailand and Indonesia, right? Some people don't have a Facebook page, God, they don't even have a Snapchat.
Horrible.
No, I mean, it's still, line is predominantly the big thing, but what channels should you be on? How should you market? How frequent should you market? How long should it be? And basically, if you don't do all this, the 30% people, basically, you don't have anything. Your company will die if you don't have this strategy already. Your company will die in 10 years. That's basically what's happening in Thailand and Indonesia. People are just not adapting in time.
This discussion's got me thinking. I was out last night, I had a few too many drinks, and so I'm probably just lucidly thinking wrong. But my general thought about this is that, I'm not sure that, I'll give you an example. I'm pretty sure that I meet, millennial Gen Z people who are not part of that demographic, but are part of that mindset. Do you know what I mean? I'm not being funny, but you guys are all, you started by saying you're not millennials, right? But you're millennials.
Actually, I'm on the cusp. I'm on the cusp.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's all I came to say. No, but what I mean is, as a mindset goes.
Oh,
right?
and Silicon Valley is definitely that mindset.
Exactly, it's a mindset.
Yeah, privileged.
And I think if you think about it, for you guys here, right, stand up if this doesn't apply to you. You're affected by incessant technological change, and you've constantly got new platforms giving you new messages to the point where you have to download some kind of meditation app just to stay sane, right?
By the way, there's a new app called Calm for meditation purposes.
Mike Smith, yeah, he's a friend of mine, yeah. You've seen globalization happen, and there's winners and losers. You've seen terrorism and the war on terror. You've seen, what was the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year last year? Post-truth, right? So here's what I think it comes down to, right? If you are a savvy and sophisticated consumer of communications, you do not trust anyone. This generation, Gen Z, have seen 45% divorce rate in their own family unit.
Yeah.
So even their own family unit has fallen apart.
And they're growing up into a family that's in debt, so that's why they don't want to spend their own money.
Economic
They've seen
crash.
what we've done to the economy.
We're able to, every time the LAPD gives someone a good beating, we're able to see it syndicated on social platforms. So the point is, and take this the right way, guys, if you work at an agency or you work at a brand, and I will stop with this, if you think people trust brands, you have a hole in your head. Because, of course, they don't trust brands. Nobody trusts. You don't even trust the President of the United States of America. You don't trust your own family. So the point is, we have a crisis of trust. And we can define it as millennials or Gen Z or whatever, but it's a mindset. And it's a new consumer mindset.
That's totally true. And it's top down in our country, in England probably. So Brexit, we went through the same. But the weird thing is that this generation, I think 42% of them say that social media has a direct impact on how they feel about themselves. Anyway.
The positive part of this, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, the positive side is this,
Oh, really?
that they are super informed.
Yes.
They know how to verify information.
They're
They
very
have their own
independent,
channels,
they're very much
which
in
you and I
control.
don't have access to. I'll give you an example. I mean, I thought I knew a little bit about cars, and we were picking up a car 2 weeks back. I just thought of the model, and I thought I'll go to this site where I'll get some reviews, and I'll know the rating and everything. Within 5 minutes, my son gave me more feedback about the car than I could ever imagine to get. And he clearly had his own sources, he had his own influencers, he had his own channel, the information was verified. So think about it. I bought a car, and the decision was made by my 14-year-old son. Because he's more well-informed than I am, he has his own channels, and I like to think that I know a little bit about the internet,
Yeah,
but
it's
he's
also,
more informed than I
that
am.
critical tone is like, again, every generation has that critical tone towards the younger generation because
That's
they
right.
feel like these guys, rebel and disrespect all of the values that we represent, to which I'll say, keep it up, amen, this is good. This is how evolution occurs and, progress, so it's good. It's good for humanity.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's why, again, I keep harping on why, even though I'm targeting X and millennial, a lot of people disregard Gen Z, but actually it's much more important because they influence the purchasing power. And again, for me as well, initially before—
By the way, they're just kids, they don't have their own purchasing power yet. I mean, obviously it's always been the case with kids, right? I used to work for Nickelodeon and we would advertise to kids about cars and insurance because we knew that they will, help influence the parents' decision about. So it's always been the case.
Wow.
It's
But
more of
now
a matter
even
of their
more.
age than their generation.
Now even more, they got the video, the 3D, they got the this, the that, the whole specs, everything, and the price comparison, it's all there. And so it goes back to the brand part, and I know this sounds like it's not a real issue, but it is. People here in this room who probably take care of brands who are in, because Thailand and Indonesia and Vietnam, there isn't enough data on each of the brands, each of the products, each of all of that stuff, because at the end of the day, if you don't have all your shit online, then there's no shit for the kid to talk to the parent, right? So, I mean, that's just something that we've realized in the last couple of years, and we're trying to put everything that we know online and have that strategy in all the different forms that we can, video, on Playbuzz, and everything. So, we really do have to address them. I mean, it's important. If not, you die.
Oh, so would you ever eventually try to reach Z segment? Would you ever eventually try to reach when they get older?
Yeah,
perhaps?
for sure. And again, even though I
Maybe.
had the disclaimer that that's who I target right now, X and
Yeah.
millennial, I am always constantly studying this because I know if not, then I'm going to be the dinosaur in the room. So I
Yeah.
have to, for sure.
So of all these, so they know more. They're better informed. They're probably more suspicious of what's happened before because they've seen. I mean, they can go on Facebook Live and see horrific things, unfortunately, and there's bullying, a high degree of bullying against this age. I'm just wondering, eventually, what becomes for them the next kind of digital tools like virtual reality, or maybe that's the way you sell to them, whether it's content or a good.
I feel like we're constantly, and I think people said it in many ways, we're trying to force new technologies
Yeah.
upon them. We're trying to say, here's a new thing. Eventually, the technologies that really catch on are the ones that integrate into your daily life. It's the opposite of virtual reality. Virtual reality is trying to take over your complete, mindfulness and just say, focus only on that, and you are completely disconnected from the world. While the technologies that did become part of our life, like cell phones, became part of our life because they fit into our pocket, right? They combine with our daily life, and eventually they take over, and that's fine. But for now, I think it's less about I think that a lot of the live video and virtual reality, a lot of it is really attempts of the older generation to force new things, to force new tools, so we can continue to dictate the dialogue, continue to control the conversation, and advertise to those people. But I don't see the adoption.
Yeah, VR
Yeah, and
is
try
just
to
this
challenge me on
whole-
that one, by the way.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I agree with
Enough
you.
said.
Here's the thing about technology, right? We overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And that happens with pretty much all technology. So I would say that, look, if there's a technology that's right there in front of you now, maybe that is not the technology that will be mainstream for Generation Z. What would happen is something completely dramatically new will come up, which we haven't imagined. And that will be technology for them, because that will happen in their own lifetime. Right now, all these technologies have been existing for some time. So that's my bet.
But you know, when you look at science fiction movies from the 70s and 80s, they all predicted very well the technologies, you know, they predicted video conferencing, cell phone, GPS, you know, all of that stuff. And, you know, I don't think any of them predicted that virtual reality will really become part of your day-to-day life. It just, you know, technology needs to somehow, as I said, integrate into your daily life, help you be assistive in your day-to-day life, not completely force a new form of interaction with reality.
Beam me up, Scotty.
Yeah, I think if you look at, like, how many people have recently watched the 360 video, right? Like, I mean, once you get the joke, you're done, right? It's like, how many times can you watch a Formula One driver driving around a track in 360 or a jet fighter take off? It doesn't interest the human mind anymore because it's a gimmick. Like, sorry if this is what you do for a living, but, like, until someone can bring true storytelling to those formats, to animate them, because what is the force that animates the format is what we should concentrate on, right? And the force that animates all formats ever is storytelling. And so if you don't master the real strategic piece, which is how do you tell stories, and what's the science and the craft of that, and that's an amazing, fascinating question, you're going to be really empty. You know, it's like being obsessed with this microphone. I'm so obsessed with the fact that I can... It's like, if I misuse it, it becomes bad user experience for you, and it diminishes my equity in your eyes, right? If I start doing this, it doesn't take long before you're like, fuck this guy, right? So my point is, if we don't know how to develop a UX, which is essentially storytelling, or audience-first communications, the biggest thing right now for brands is the boardroom comms model. And the boardroom comms model is, let's talk about our product incessantly, because we're a neurotic organization. That's what everyone does. Then let's think of a media format or some new tool or trick like we've been talking about, and then let's try and make it creative, right? That is a liability as a comms model. It's what Pepsi was, it's what every liability you can imagine. Or we flip it around, and this is why as a publisher, and as a lot of publishers and people who think that way up on stage, I think we're quite lucky, we think audience first. And when you think audience first, you can redesign your comms, then you're getting somewhere.
That's interesting. I'm glad you said storytelling, because the narrative is always wins in the end, no matter what the format or the platform you try to reach out to people. If it's a winning story, they'll always go for it. I think we're almost done. That was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much to John and his panel on Gen Z.